The last thing she said to me that night, before the world I knew fractured into a million pieces, was that the sight of me made her skin crawl. It was a line delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon's blade, designed to cut deep and sever whatever remained of the bond we once shared. I stood there in the marble-floored foyer of the house my hands had practically built, the smell of lemon-scented polish and faint, expensive perfume hanging in the air, and I felt nothing but a hollow, ringing shock. The words didn't just hang between us, they fell like a slab of granite, crushing the air from my lungs. "Get out, Mark," she said, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "Just pack a bag and go. I can't do this anymore. I can't look at you anymore." Her name was Sarah. For 15 years, she had been the center of my universe. We had built a life, or so I thought. I had built a successful construction business from the ground up, pouring sweat and soul into every foundation, every frame, every roof. I did it for her, for our children, Leo and Chloe. I wanted to give them the stability I never had, the beautiful home, the good schools, the life of comfortable suburban peace. I thought that was what we were both working towards. I worked from sunrise to sunset, coming home with hands calloused and an aching back, and she managed the home, a task I never once underestimated. She was the queen of her castle, and I was the willing serf, laboring to keep the walls strong and the coffers full. The argument had started, as they so often did, about money. Not a lack of it, but the application of it. Her mother, Eleanor, had decided she needed a new sunroom, an extravagant glass and cedar monstrosity that would cost more than my first house. Eleanor had a way of wanting things that seamlessly became Sarah's needs. Sarah presented the idea not as a request, but as a foregone conclusion. I was simply the instrument of its funding. When I hesitated, when I suggested we wait a few months, that a big commercial project was at a critical, cash flow sensitive stage, her face tightened. "It's always the business, isn't it?" she'd said, her tone dripping with a familiar, weary disdain. "It's always, wait a few months. My mother is 70 years old, Mark. She deserves a little bit of comfort." "Eleanor is more comfortable than most queens," I'd replied, trying to keep my voice even. "This isn't about comfort, Sarah. It's a $30,000 whim. We have to be smart." "Smart?" she laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "You mean cheap. My friends' husbands build them vacation homes. You balk at a sunroom for my mother. Do you see the difference?" I did see the difference. I saw it every time she spoke of her friends' husbands, the bankers and the surgeons. I was just a builder, a man who worked with his hands. No matter how successful the business became, in her eyes, and by extension, Eleanor's, I was still just the hired help who had somehow ended up in the master bedroom. My sweat was the currency that paid for her life, but the source of it was a source of endless, unspoken shame. The argument had spiraled from there, dredging up years of perceived slights and resentments until it culminated in her final, brutal command. So I went. I walked up the grand, curving staircase, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence of the house. I passed the closed doors of my children's bedrooms. They were at Eleanor's for the night, a small mercy I couldn't yet appreciate. I couldn't have looked them in the eye. What would I have said? I packed a duffel bag with numb, fumbling hands. A few pairs of jeans, some shirts, my worn work boots, the essentials of a man who was no longer welcome in his own life. Each item I touched felt alien, a prop from a play whose final act I hadn't seen coming. As I came back down the stairs, bag in hand, I heard her voice. She was in the kitchen, her back to me, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was different now. It was broken, thick with tears. It was a masterful performance. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed into the phone. He just snapped. "He's leaving, Mom. He's leaving us." I froze, my hand tight on the banister. She was talking to Eleanor. Of course. "No, the kids don't know yet. How can I tell them? How do you tell your children that their father is abandoning them?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Abandoning. She was painting me as a monster, a man who would walk away from his own children. The injustice of it was a hot, acidic thing rising in my throat. I had given everything for those kids. Every early morning, every late night, every splinter and every scar. They were my reason for breathing. and she was using them as a weapon, crafting a narrative of her victimhood before I was even out the door. I wanted to storm in there, to scream, to grab the phone and expose the lie. But what good would it do? It would only validate her story. He snapped. See? I walked past the kitchen entrance, a ghost in my own home, and pulled the heavy front door open. The click of the latch behind me was the sound of a lock turning on a prison cell, but I wasn't sure if I was the one being locked out or the one who had just escaped. I sat in my truck, parked a block away under the weak yellow glow of a streetlight. The engine was off. The silence was absolute. I looked at the silhouette of the house, the warm lights glowing in the windows. It looked like a picture of a happy home, a perfect, beautiful lie. The shock began to recede, replaced by something colder, harder. It was a quiet decision, made not in a moment of anger, but in a moment of profound, painful clarity. This was not a fight I was going to lose. She had drawn a line, not just between us, but between me and my children. She had declared war, and she had chosen the battleground, the hearts and minds of Leo and Chloe. I would not let her win. My hand, still grimy from the day's work, trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone. The screen was too bright in the darkness of the cab. I didn't know what to do or who to call. My mind was a blizzard of panic and rage. But beneath it, that new, cold resolve was taking root. I opened a web browser and typed 3 words into the search bar. Best family lawyer. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know where I would sleep that night or when I would see my children again. But in that moment, sitting alone in the dark, I knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a fight for my life. I made the call. The first few nights were a blur of cheap motel rooms. The air in them was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 lonely travelers and the cloying scent of industrial-strength disinfectant. I lay awake on stiff, starched sheets, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the drone of the ancient air conditioner, a poor substitute for the familiar sounds of a sleeping house. The silence was the worst part. At home, even in the dead of night, there was always something. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the soft sigh of one of the kids turning in their sleep. Here, there was only the oppressive quiet of my own solitude, a void that my panicked thoughts rushed to fill. I saw Sarah's face, her lips curled in that final contemptuous sneer. I heard her voice, dripping with poison as she spoke to her mother, abandoning them. The word echoed in the empty room, a constant, tormenting refrain. Had I been a bad husband, a bad father? I replayed the last 15 years in my head, searching for the moment it had all gone wrong. My first meeting with Mr. Evans was in a small, unassuming office in a brick building downtown. He was an older man with kind eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses and a reassuringly calm demeanor. He didn't look like a shark. He looked like a high school history teacher. He listened patiently as I stumbled through the story, my voice cracking, my hands twisting in my lap. I told him everything. The argument, the years of feeling less than, the final command to leave, and the phone call I had overheard. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, steepling his fingers under his chin. He wasn't looking at me with pity, but with a focused intensity. "Mark," he said, his voice even and steady. "The first thing you need to understand is that your wife has just executed a classic, premeditated constructive eviction. She created an intolerable situation to force you out, then immediately began building her narrative. The abandonment story is designed to alienate you from your children and prejudice the court from the very beginning." Hearing it laid out so clinically was both terrifying and validating. I wasn't going crazy. This was a strategy, a game. "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling a fresh wave of helplessness. "Mate, for now, we do nothing that she expects," he said. "She expects you to get angry, to call and yell, to show up at the house and make a scene. We will do none of that. We will be calm. We will be methodical. You will communicate with her only through text or email, and only about the children. You will be polite and reasonable at all times. We are going to give her all the rope she needs, and we're going to trust that her arrogance will lead her to use it." He gave me my first set of instructions. Document everything, every penny I spent, every attempt I made to contact the kids. He also told me to start gathering financial documents. Bank statements, tax returns, credit card bills, anything you can access legally. We need a clear picture of the marital finances. That night, back in the motel, I logged into our shared family cloud drive. It was something I had set up years ago, a digital filing cabinet for mortgages, insurance policies, and photos. I assumed she would have locked me out by now, but in her haste, she must have forgotten. I felt a pang of guilt, like I was snooping, but Mr. Evans's words echoed in my mind. Methodical. I started downloading bank statements, my eyes widening at the credit card bills. Thousands of dollars spent at high-end boutiques, spas, restaurants I had never even been to. It was a life being lived entirely separate from mine, funded by my labor. The bitterness was a sharp, coppery taste in my mouth. But then I saw it, a folder tucked away inside another folder labeled Summer Vacation Plans. It was titled simply New Life. My heart began to pound in my chest. With a trembling finger, I clicked it open. It was all there. It was a blueprint for my destruction. There were saved real estate listings from Zillow and Redfin for townhouses in a more affluent neighborhood, all dated from 3 to 4 months prior. There were spreadsheets, meticulously detailing our assets, with columns calculating how much she could expect to get in a divorce settlement. There was a draft of a custody agreement, written in cold, legalistic language that painted me as a traveling, work-obsessed, and emotionally distant father who should be limited to supervised visitation on alternating weekends. But the worst of it, the thing that made the air leave my body in a rush, was a series of emails between her and Eleanor. They were dated over the last 6 months. They discussed the plan. They talked about provoking a fight, about using my temper against me, a temper I didn't even have. I was the calm one, the steady one. They were inventing a version of me to suit their narrative. In one email, Eleanor wrote, "You just need to push him to the breaking point. He's a simple man, Sarah. He'll get loud, he'll get angry, and then you call the police. That's all you need. Once he's out of the house, we control everything." Sarah's reply, from 2 weeks before she kicked me out, "I'm trying, Mom, but he's like a rock. He just absorbs it. He just keeps working. It's almost like he doesn't care. Maybe I just need to be direct. Tell him to go. He's so obsessed with his honor, he probably won't even fight it." I felt sick, physically ill. I leaned over the cheap motel desk, my head in my hands, and I think I made a sound, a low, wounded animal noise. This wasn't a marriage that had failed. It was a contract that had expired. I was a project that had reached its conclusion. My purpose, to build the wealth and the lifestyle she desired, had been served. Now, I was just an obstacle to her and her mother's next chapter. Any lingering shred of doubt, any microscopic hope for reconciliation, was incinerated in that moment. The pain was immense, a vast black ocean of it. But floating in that ocean was a small, hard island of pure, cold rage. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about my children. She wasn't just trying to divorce me. She was trying to erase me, to rewrite their history, to poison their memories, to steal their father from them while he was still alive and breathing and desperate to see them. I methodically downloaded every file, every email, every spreadsheet, and every real estate listing. I saved them to a new encrypted hard drive. I made a backup. And another. This folder, this new life plan, was not just evidence. It was a declaration of war, and I would not be the only casualty. The shock had passed. The grief was still there, a heavy cloak I would carry for a long time. But now it was joined by something else, a steely, unbending resolve. My focus narrowed until there was only one objective in sight, the truth. I would bring the truth to light, not for revenge, but for Leo and Chloe. They deserved to know their father, and they would. I swore it to myself in the humming silence of that lonely room. The game was on. The days that followed turned into weeks of a strange, dislocated existence. I found a small, furnished apartment to rent by the month. It was sparse, with mismatched furniture and thin walls, but it was mine. It was a sanctuary from the sterile impersonality of the motel. I went to work every day, losing myself in the familiar rhythms of blueprints, lumber, and concrete. My business partner, Dave, knew something was wrong. I was quieter, harder. I told him only that Sarah and I were separating. He was a good man and didn't press, just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Whatever you need, Mark, you know where I am." His simple, unquestioning support was a lifeline. My communication with Sarah was exactly as Mr. Evans had prescribed, brief, polite, and exclusively through email. I wrote every message as if a judge were reading over my shoulder. "Sarah, I would like to schedule a video call with Leo and Chloe this evening. Would 7 p.m. work for you?" Her replies were often delayed and always dripping with passive aggression. "They have a lot of homework tonight, Mark. They're very behind and feeling stressed. I don't think it's a good idea to disrupt their routine." "Sarah, I haven't spoken to them in a week. They need to hear my voice, please." "Your choices have consequences. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you walked out on your family." I saved every single email. Each refusal was another brick in the wall of evidence we were building. Mr. Evans had told me to start a journal, a simple notebook where I documented every single day, the date, the fact that I had emailed to speak to the kids, her response, how I felt, the gut-wrenching ache of being denied contact with my own children. It felt pointless at first, writing down my own misery, but Mr. Evans insisted. "This is not a diary, Mark. This is a logbook. It demonstrates a pattern of behavior. It shows your consistent effort and her consistent obstruction. It is incredibly powerful." One evening, desperate, I violated the email-only rule. I called her phone. It rang and rang before clicking to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A third time. This time, she picked up. "What do you want, Mark?" she hissed, her voice low. I could hear the television in the background. "I want to talk to my kids, Sarah. Just for 5 minutes, please." "They're busy," she said flatly. "Doing what?" "It doesn't matter. They don't want to talk to you." The lie was so blatant, so cruel, it stole my breath. "That's not true," I whispered. "You're telling them not to." "I'm telling them the truth," she snapped, her voice rising. "That their father decided he didn't want a family anymore. Now stop calling, you're upsetting them." And she hung up. I stared at my phone, my hand shaking with a powerless rage. But then I remembered something else Mr. Evans had suggested. I had downloaded a call recording app. The conversation was saved. Another brick, a heavy one. The official divorce papers arrived a week later, delivered by a grim-faced process server to my job site. I had to sign for them in front of my crew, a fresh, public humiliation that burned in my cheeks. I waited until I was back in my truck to open the thick envelope. The petition was even worse than I had imagined. It was a work of fiction, a masterpiece of character assassination. It cited irreconcilable differences, but went on to detail my supposed cruel and inhuman treatment. It claimed I was emotionally abusive, controlling with money, the irony was breathtaking, and that I had abandoned the marital home and the minor children without cause or warning. It requested sole legal and physical custody for Sarah, a wildly disproportionate amount of alimony and child support, and for me to have only professionally supervised visitation twice a month at my own expense. It was designed to break me, to make me feel like fighting was hopeless, that the easiest path was to just sign it all away, to accept the role of the villain she had written for me. And for a moment, sitting there with the papers in my lap, the smell of sawdust and sweat filling the cab, it almost worked. The weight of it was crushing. How could I fight this? She had the house, the kids, the narrative. What did I have? A sad little apartment, a hard drive full of secrets, and a history teacher for a lawyer. But then I thought of Leo's laugh. I thought of the way Chloe would bury her face in my shoulder when she was sad. I thought of reading them bedtime stories, my voice low, their small bodies warm against mine. These were not memories she could erase. This was a reality she could not deny. This wasn't about the house or the money. It was about them. I drove straight to Mr. Evans's office. I didn't have an appointment, but his secretary saw the look on my face and showed me right in. I threw the papers on his desk. "Look at this," I said, my voice tight. "She's calling me abusive. She's saying I abandoned them." He picked up the documents and read through them, his expression unchanging. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even surprised. He nodded slowly. "Standard scorched earth tactics, Mark. It's designed to intimidate. Don't let it." Don't let it? Mr. Evans, she's trying to take my children away from me based on a pile of lies. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. Yes, she is. And we are going to let her. We are going to let her build her case on that pile of lies. We will file a simple response, denying the allegations and reserving our rights. We will comply with any temporary requests for financial disclosures. We will not show our hand. We will not reveal the New Life folder. We will not mention the emails or the call recordings. We will let her and her lawyer walk into that courtroom for the temporary hearing on custody and support, brimming with confidence, believing you are a broken man with no defense. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. Arrogance. Mark, it makes people sloppy. Your wife and her mother believe you are simple. They believe they are smarter than you. They believe they have already won. We are going to let them believe that right up until the moment the judge asks me if the defense has anything to present. A slow, cold calm washed over me. He was right. My anger was a liability. My despair was a weakness. The only weapon I had was the truth, and the only way to use it effectively was with patience and strategy. I had to let Sarah build her own prison. I just had to wait for the right moment to hand her the key. I spent the next month in a state of suspended animation. I worked. I ate. I slept. I continued my journal. I continued my polite, fruitless emails requesting to see my kids. Sarah's lawyer was aggressive, sending discovery requests and threatening motions. Mr. Evans handled it all with a placid calm, responding to every threat with quiet, legally precise compliance. We provided my bank statements, my pay stubs, my business financials. We hid nothing. We also asked for nothing beyond the standard disclosures. To Sarah, it must have looked like a full-scale surrender. I was the quiet, beaten man, just as she and her mother had predicted. I imagined their conversations full of smug satisfaction. He's not even fighting. I told you he was weak. I found an unlikely ally in my neighbor from the old house, a retired woman named Carol. Her house was next to mine, and she'd often been out gardening when I was in the yard playing with Leo and Chloe. One day I called her. I was hesitant, not wanting to drag anyone else into my mess, but I was desperate for any news of the kids. Mark, dear, it's so good to hear your voice, she said warmly. I was so worried. We saw the moving truck a few weeks ago, but it was just Sarah and her mother. I took a deep breath. Carol, I'm going through a divorce. Sarah and we've separated. Oh, you poor thing, she said, her voice full of genuine sympathy. I had a feeling something was wrong. Sarah has been different, and I hardly ever see the children outside anymore. It's a shame. They loved playing on that swing set you built. I asked her if she would be willing to write a short statement, just a letter describing what she had observed over the years. Me coaching Leo's soccer team, teaching Chloe to ride her bike, the weekend barbecues. Of course I would, dear, she said without hesitation. That woman is telling people you just up and left. I knew that couldn't be right. I've seen you with those kids. A man doesn't just walk away from that kind of love. Her words were a balm on a raw wound. It was the first time someone outside of my lawyer and my business partner had validated my reality. Someone else saw the truth. Her letter arrived a few days later, a simple, powerful testament to my life as a father. It was another brick for our wall, a beautiful, solid one. The date for the temporary hearing was set. It was for custody, child support, alimony, and exclusive possession of the marital home, all pending the final divorce. It was, for all intents and purposes, the main event. The outcome of this hearing would set the tone for the entire divorce. Sarah's lawyer was pushing for it, confident they would get everything they asked for. They saw me as an open and shut case of abandonment, an easy win. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my little apartment, the city lights painting patterns on the wall. The hard drive with the New Life folder sat on the table next to me, a small black rectangle that held my entire future. I felt a tremor of fear. What if it wasn't enough? What if the judge didn't see it? What if Sarah managed to cry her way out of it? The legal system was a foreign country to me. I didn't know its customs or its language. But then I closed my eyes and pictured Leo and Chloe. I saw their faces, bright with laughter. I felt the phantom weight of their small hands in mine. This fear was nothing compared to the fear of losing them. My resolve hardened once more. I had spent my life building things that would last, houses, a business. Now, I had to build a bridge back to my children, and the foundation had to be the truth. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, I would start laying the first stone, and I would not stop until they could safely cross back to me. The courtroom was cold, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. The wood paneling was dark and imposing, the ceilings impossibly high. Everything was designed to make you feel small, insignificant. I sat beside Mr. Evans at our designated table, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. I wore my only suit, a charcoal gray one I'd bought for a wedding years ago. It felt stiff and unfamiliar, a costume for a role I never wanted to play. Across the aisle, Sarah sat with her lawyer, a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit whose confident smirk never quite left his face. Beside Sarah, in the first row of the gallery, was her mother Eleanor. She was dressed in a severe navy blue dress, her face a mask of grim support for her grieving daughter. Sarah herself was a portrait of sorrowful dignity. She wore a simple black dress. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her makeup was minimal, just enough to make her look pale and strained. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, a perfect performance of a woman on the verge of a breakdown. She wouldn't look at me. It was as if I were a ghost, already erased from her life. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and a judge in black robes swept into the room and took her seat on the bench. She looked severe, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Davies, went first. He laid out their case with smooth, practiced ease. He painted a picture of a loving, devoted mother whose world was shattered when her husband, a man increasingly consumed by his work and a volatile temper, walked out on her and their two beautiful children. He used the word abandoned at least a dozen times. It was like a drumbeat, a constant reminder of the narrative they had so carefully constructed. "Mr. Davies," the judge interrupted at one point, her voice dry. "I've read the petition. I'm aware of the allegations. Let's move on to testimony." He called Sarah to the stand. She walked slowly, clutching her tissue, a woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her lawyer led her through the story gently, his voice full of theatrical sympathy. "Mrs. Miller," he began, "could you please tell the court about the events of the evening of April 12th? Sarah took a shaky breath. "It was a Friday," she began, her voice soft and trembling. "Mark came home from work late, as usual. He was in a terrible mood. We had a disagreement about finances. He became enraged." She paused, dabbing her eyes. "He was yelling. I've never seen him like that. It was terrifying. He said some awful things. And then he just said he was done. He packed a bag and he walked out. He didn't even say goodbye to the children." It was a lie, a complete pathological lie. The kids weren't even home. But she delivered it with such conviction, her voice cracking at just the right moments. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, a wave of silent condemnation. I kept my face a perfect mask of neutrality, just as Mr. Evans had instructed. I stared straight ahead, my jaw tight. "And has he made any effort to see the children since he abandoned his family?" Mr. Davies asked. "No," she said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "He's called a few times, but he's always angry, demanding. It scares the children. They're confused. They don't understand why their daddy left them. I'm trying to protect them from his instability." My hands clenched into fists under the table. Mr. Evans placed a calming hand on my arm, a silent command to stay still. Mr. Davies continued, building his case brick by brick. He presented her financial affidavits, showing her as a homemaker with no income, entirely dependent on me. He requested the house, the car, a staggering amount in temporary alimony and child support, and, of course, sole custody. It was a complete rout. When he was finished, he looked at the judge with an expression that said, "Case closed." "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. You may step down," he said. "Not so fast," the judge said, turning her sharp gaze to my table. "Mr. Evans, do you have any questions for this witness?" Mr. Evans rose slowly. "Yes, Your Honor, I have a few." He walked towards the witness stand, not with the predatory swagger of Sarah's lawyer, but with a quiet, academic air. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," he said politely. Sarah simply nodded, clutching her tissue. Mrs. Miller, you testified that on the night my client left the marital home, he didn't even say goodbye to the children. Is that correct? Yes, she whispered. And where were the children at that exact moment? Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second, a tiny flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. They were in their rooms. Are you certain about that, Mrs. Miller? Mr. Evans asked, his voice still gentle. Because my client recalls that Leo and Chloe were spending that night with your mother, Eleanor. Is it possible you've misremembered? Sarah's face paled slightly. Mr. Davies shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is badgering the witness. Counsel is asking a clarifying question, the judge said, waving him down. Overruled. Please answer the question, Mrs. Miller. They may have been at my mother's, she conceded, her voice barely audible. It's all such a blur. I was very upset. I'm sure you were, Mr. Evans said. Now, you also testified that my client has made no real effort to see his children and that his calls are angry and demanding. Is that an accurate summary? Yes, she said, a little more forcefully now, regaining some of her composure. He's trying to bully me. Bully you, Mr. Evans repeated thoughtfully. He walked back to our table and picked up a thin folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a series of emails marked as Defense Exhibit A. These are all the emails sent by my client to Mrs. Miller over the past 7 weeks. He handed a copy to Mr. Davies, whose confident smirk was beginning to fade, and another to the clerk to give to the judge. The judge put on her reading glasses and began to scan the pages. The courtroom was silent, except for the rustle of paper. Mrs. Miller, Mr. Evans said, could you please read the email from my client dated April 16th? Sarah squinted at the page she was handed. It says, Sarah, I hope you and the kids are okay. I would very much like to schedule a call with them. Please let me know what time works best. Love, Mark. Is that an angry and demanding email, Mrs. Miller? Well, no, but... And could you read your reply? She stammered. It says, now is not a good time. Thank you. And the next one, from April 18th, where my client asks again to speak to his children. He was harassing me, she said, her voice rising in pitch. Was he harassing you, or was he a father trying to speak to his children? A father you were systematically denying access to? Over the past 7 weeks, my client has made 23 separate written requests to speak with his children. You have denied 21 of them and ignored 2. Does that sound like a man who has abandoned his family? Mr. Davies was on his feet again. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said, but her eyes never left Sarah's face. Let's move on, Mr. Evans. Certainly, Your Honor. Mr. Evans put the emails down and picked up a small digital audio recorder. Your Honor, I now have a recording of a phone call between my client and Mrs. Miller on the evening of May 4th. A jolt went through Sarah. I saw it. Her eyes widened in panic, and she shot a desperate look at her lawyer, who looked utterly bewildered. Objection! Mr. Davies yelled. Improper foundation. We have no idea if this recording is authentic. It was made on my client's phone, which he has with him, and he is prepared to testify that it is a true and accurate recording of the conversation, Mr. Evans said calmly. Furthermore, under this state's one-party consent law, it is perfectly legal. I'll allow it, the judge said, her expression grim. Play the recording. Mr. Evans pressed a button. My own voice filled the silent courtroom, strained but polite. I want to talk to my kids, Sarah. Just for 5 minutes. Please. Then Sarah's voice, cold and hard. They're busy. Doing what? It doesn't matter. They don't want to talk to you. My recorded voice, a pained whisper. That's not true. You're telling them not to. And finally, Sarah's voice, sharp and angry. I'm telling them the truth, that their father decided he didn't want a family anymore. Now stop calling. You're upsetting them. The sound of the call disconnecting echoed in the room. A heavy, profound silence fell. The carefully constructed image of the gentle, heartbroken victim had been shattered. In its place was the voice of a cold, manipulative liar. Sarah was ashen. Her hands were shaking, and not for theatrical effect this time. Eleanor was leaning forward in her seat, her mouth slightly agape. But Mr. Evans wasn't finished. He walked back to our table and picked up a single black portable hard drive. He held it up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dropping to a somber, serious tone. "The petitioner's entire case rests on the allegation that my client, in a sudden fit of rage, abandoned his family. That this was an unforeseen event that left Mrs. Miller and her children devastated and destitute." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But what if it wasn't unforeseen? What if, in fact, it was a meticulously planned event? What if the person who planned it wasn't my client at all, but the petitioner herself? He turned to face Sarah directly. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She knew what was on that drive. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice like ice, "can you please tell the court what you know about a folder on your family's cloud drive, a folder entitled New Life?" That was the moment she broke. It was not a slow crumble, but a sudden, violent implosion. Her composure, her dignity, her entire fabricated reality shattered into a million pieces. "No!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound that was nothing like the soft, wounded whisper she had used before. She shot to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's lying! He hacked my computer! He's a monster!" Mr. Davies rushed to her side, trying to calm her, but she shoved him away. Her eyes were wide and wild, darting between me, Mr. Evans, and the judge. The mask was gone. This was the real Sarah, the one who had told me the sight of me made her skin crawl. "Your Honor, this is an invasion of my privacy," she screamed. "He's twisting everything." The judge banged her gavel, a sharp cracking sound that cut through Sarah's hysteria. "Mrs. Miller, you will control yourself or I will have you removed from my courtroom." But Sarah was beyond reason. The exposure, the sudden and total loss of control, had pushed her over the edge. "He was holding me back," she raged, her words now directed at the judge, at the whole room, at the world. "I deserved more than him. I deserved a better life. He was just a builder, a common laborer. He was never good enough for me or my children." The confession hung in the air, more damning than anything on the hard drive. She had said it. She had admitted the motivation behind the entire charade, the snobbery, the entitlement, the cold, calculating cruelty. It was all laid bare. In the gallery, Eleanor had gone rigid, her face a horrified slate of gray. Mr. Davies looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He had built his case on the word of a woman who had just immolated herself on the witness stand. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just watched her. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger or pain. I felt a profound and desolate pity. She had been so consumed by her desire for a different life that she had destroyed the one she had, and in the process, she had destroyed herself. "That is quite enough, Mrs. Miller," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. She looked at Sarah, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical disgust. "Bailiff, please escort Mrs. Miller to the waiting room. She can return when she is capable of conducting herself with the decorum this court requires." Two uniformed bailiffs approached the stand. Sarah looked at them, then at the judge, a final, desperate plea in her eyes. But the judge's face was stone. As they gently took her arms, her rage collapsed into ragged, heaving sobs. She was no longer a powerful queen deposing a disloyal subject. She was just a woman who had been caught in a web of her own making, and she was being led away in disgrace. As they walked her past our table, her eyes met mine for a brief second. They were filled with a toxic cocktail of hatred, disbelief, and a sliver of pathetic begging. I held her gaze, my expression unreadable. I didn't need to gloat. Her public collapse was a far greater humiliation than any I could ever inflict. I simply watched until she was gone, the sound of her sobbing fading down the hallway. The courtroom was utterly silent. The power shift was absolute, a palpable thing you could feel in the air. A moment ago, I was the villain. Now, I was the man who had weathered a storm of lies. The judge took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at Mr. Davies, who was still standing, pale and speechless. "Counselor," she said, her voice heavy with disapproval, "do you have anything else? Or do you wish to reconsider your client's entire petition?" Mr. Davies just shook his head, slumping back into his chair, defeated. The judge then turned her gaze to Mr. Evans. "Mr. Evans," she said, "please tell me exactly what is on that hard drive." And so, calmly and methodically, he did. The power shift was complete. A profound quiet settled over the courtroom after Sarah was led away. Mr. Evans stood and, in a calm, measured voice, detailed the contents of the New Life folder for the judge. He didn't embellish or editorialize. He simply presented the facts. He described the real estate listings, dated months before our separation. He explained the financial spreadsheets that treated our marriage like a corporate dissolution. He read excerpts from the emails between Sarah and Eleanor, the cold-blooded plotting laid bare in their own words. With each new piece of evidence, I could see Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Davies, shrink a little more in his chair. He had been a co-author of a fiction, and the truth was now dismantling his work page by page. The judge listened intently, her face grim. She didn't interrupt. She just absorbed it all, her sharp eyes occasionally flicking towards me, as if seeing me for the first time. When Mr. Evans was finished, he sat down. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It was the silence of a truth that could no longer be denied. The judge looked at me for a long moment. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice softer than it had been all day, "you have endured a campaign of deception that is, frankly, shocking to this court. Your wife's actions and testimony demonstrate a profound and disturbing willingness to perjure herself and manipulate this legal process for her own gain. Her attempt to alienate you from your children is particularly egregious." She then turned her attention back to the empty witness stand as if Sarah were still sitting there. "The petitioner's request for sole custody is denied. Her request for exclusive use of the marital home is denied. Her request for temporary alimony is denied." With each denial, it felt like a physical weight was being lifted from my shoulders. "Instead," the judge continued, her voice hardening again, "I am issuing a temporary order granting Mr. Miller primary physical and legal custody of the minor children, effective immediately. Mrs. Miller will have supervised visitation twice a week at a facility to be determined at her own expense. I am also ordering a full psychological evaluation for Mrs. Miller, the results of which will be provided to this court before any further custody determinations are made." She wasn't done. "Furthermore, I am ordering that the marital home be listed for sale immediately, with the proceeds to be held in escrow pending the final divorce settlement. Mrs. Miller will have 30 days to vacate the premises." It was a total reversal, a complete and utter vindication. Everything Sarah had tried to do to me had been turned back upon her. She had tried to make me homeless, and now she was the one being forced to leave. She had tried to take my children, and now she could only see them under the watchful eye of a stranger. The judge looked at Mr. Davies. "Counselor, I suggest you have a very serious conversation with your client about the penalties for perjury and the benefits of a swift and reasonable settlement. This court does not appreciate being lied to." She banged her gavel. "We are adjourned." As she swept out of the room, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the gallery. Mr. Evans put a firm, steady hand on my shoulder. "We did it, Mark," he said quietly. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I lowered my head into my hands, not in despair, but in an overwhelming, crushing wave of relief. The tension I had been carrying for months, the fear, the anger, the profound loneliness, it all came pouring out. I didn't sob, but silent tears streamed through my fingers, splashing onto the polished wood of the table. They were tears of exhaustion, of gratitude, of a victory that felt less triumphant than just necessary. After a few moments, I collected myself and looked up. Mr. Evans was still there, watching me with those kind, patient eyes. "Go get your kids, Mark," he said. "That's the only thing that matters now." Picking up Leo and Chloe from Eleanor's house was one of the strangest, most difficult things I have ever had to do. I drove there with the court order clutched in my hand like a talisman. Eleanor answered the door. Her face, which had been a mask of horror in the courtroom, was now set in lines of pure, unadulterated hatred. "What do you want?" she spat. "I'm here for my children, Eleanor," I said, my voice steady. I have a court order. I handed her the paper. She snatched it from my hand, and her eyes scanned the page, her expression curdling from anger to disbelief. You can't do this, she whispered. She's their mother. And I'm their father, I said, standing my ground. The judge has made her decision. Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Leo and Chloe came running to the door then, their faces lighting up when they saw me. Daddy, Chloe cried, launching herself at my legs. Leo was more hesitant, hanging back, his eyes full of confusion. He had been hearing his mother's and grandmother's poison for weeks. I knelt and hugged Chloe tightly, burying my face in her hair. It was the first time I had held her in almost 2 months. It felt like coming home after a long, brutal war. I looked up at Leo. Hey, buddy, I said softly. Eleanor put a hand on his shoulder. Your father is here to take you away for a little while, she said, her voice sweet as syrup but laced with venom. Your mother is very, very sad. Stop it, Eleanor, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare use them. I stood up, holding Chloe's hand. I walked over to Leo and knelt in front of him. I'm not taking you away, I said, looking him straight in the eye. You're coming to live with me. We're going to be okay. I promise. He looked from me to his grandmother, his little face a mess of conflicting loyalties. Finally, he gave a small, uncertain nod and took my outstretched hand. The victory in court felt abstract. This, holding my children's hands, this was real. This was everything. The weeks that followed were a period of difficult adjustment. I had to explain the situation to them in a way they could understand, without demonizing their mother. It was the hardest tightrope I've ever had to walk. I told them that Mommy and Daddy were having grown-up problems, and that for now, they would be living with me. I told them that their mother was going through a hard time and needed some space. And I told them, over and over again, that none of it was their fault, and that we both loved them more than anything in the world. Sarah called me once, about a week after the hearing. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was stripped of all its arrogance, all its anger. It was just small and broken. Mark, she said, her voice thick with tears. I'm so sorry, I messed up. I was listening to my mother. I was unhappy. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I listened in silence. I didn't know what to say. The apology felt hollow, a tactic born of desperation, not genuine remorse. Can we just stop this? She pleaded. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I miss the kids. I miss you. I thought about the New Life folder. I thought about her face as she shrieked that I was never good enough for her. The trust was not just broken, it had been pulverized. There was nothing left to fix. I have to go, Sarah, I said, my voice quiet but firm. The kids are waiting for me to make them dinner. Mark, please. I hung up the phone. It wasn't an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation. That door was closed. It had to be, for my sake, and for the sake of the new, fragile peace I was trying to build for my children. The final divorce was quiet and uncontested. Sarah, on the advice of a new, more pragmatic lawyer, agreed to a settlement. The house was sold. After paying off the mortgage and legal fees, the remaining equity was split. It was far less than she had dreamed of in her spreadsheets. She moved into a small apartment across town and found a job as a receptionist at a dental office. The court-ordered psychological evaluation had painted a picture of narcissistic tendencies and a profound sense of entitlement. My primary custody was made permanent. Life found a new rhythm, a new normal. 6 months after the hearing, I was living in a modest rented house with a small yard. It was a fraction of the size of the old house, but it was filled with a warmth the other place had never known. The walls were covered in the kids' drawings. The floor was usually littered with Legos, and the air smelled like whatever we had cooked for dinner. It was a home. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, watching Leo and Chloe chase fireflies in the twilight. The air was warm, and the sound of their laughter was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I thought about the journey of the past year. The betrayal felt like a distant scar now, a reminder of a pain that had reshaped me, but no longer defined me. I realized that Sarah, in her desperate, greedy attempt to get a better life, had inadvertently given me the best one imaginable. She had stripped away all the things I thought were important: the big house, the financial success, the image of a perfect family. And in doing so, she had revealed what was truly valuable underneath. It was this simple, profound peace, this quiet moment with my children. She had tried to take everything from me. She had tried to erase me, to paint me as a villain, to sever the most important bond in my life. But she had failed. In the end, her lies had only served to illuminate the truth. Her cruelty had only revealed my own capacity for resilience. Her betrayal had only deepened my understanding of what it truly means to be a father. Looking at my children, their faces alight with the simple joy of a summer evening, I knew I had won more than just a court case. I had won my life back. Not the life I had before, but a better one. A real one. She had sought a new life of wealth and status, and in her wake, she had left me with mine. A life built not on marble floors and expensive cars, but on bedtime stories, scraped knees, and the unconditional love of two incredible kids. And that was a victory worth any price. That was the only victory that ever mattered.